It is beauty that motivates men to greatness. And so, it follows that Alaska must be the greatest land. Barbaric and beautiful, filled with old sourdoughs, it is the last of the truly wild places on Earth. Climbers, the ones stringently striding after beauty, living on the outskirts of society, seem a natural fit for Alaska. Climbing in Alaska, we're made for each other like venison and backstrap. One of the oldest Alaskan tales we have involves climbing. During the Great Flood, the Tlingit climbed the mighty Devil's Thumb. Even with this rich history and deep synergy, comparatively recently, the little brother of climbing disciplines made its way to the last of the wild places. I have climbed and bouldered in this great state for many years, meeting some fantastic characters. Yet these wild climbers and wonderful humans are not known by the outside world. So that these tales are not forgotten, I render this into video form in the hopes that their stories remain and are told for years to come. I hope you will join me on investigating this unique and rich history of Alaskan. Now for a quick disclaimer. I'm quite doubtful that this is the full history of bouldering in Alaska with all actors and stories described in full. This is the best that I could obtain with research and stories I have heard over the years. I'm sure most stories and characters have been lost to time. I'm providing an explanation for the development and evolution of bouldering in the state as best I can. If you have any information on this, please correct me. I highly welcome it and encourage it. I also will stress that I have played a role in the development of bouldering in Alaska, but this video is not about me. It is meant to be about my forerunners and my contemporaries. However, if I do spend a somewhat disproportionate amount of time on the things I've developed and aided in developing, that is not due to hubris, that is due to familiarity. And with that, let the video begin. Our story begins far longer ago than it should, in a place it certainly shouldn't. Back before the Hueco scale, back before climbing pads, back when climbing boots, no, I don't mean alpine boots, I mean climbing boots, were cutting edge, back when climbing was a sport for disenfranchised hippies and rebels, shooting the finger at the establishment. Our story begins probably where modern rock climbing itself began, Yosemite Valley. In 1979, a man inspired by the climbing in Yosemite found a rock in the woods of Anchorage. This rock, on some cross-country skiing paths behind Service High School, led to the development of bouldering in Alaska. It's a very large rock, now tainted with graffiti and worn smooth from various climbers and gangs and high school students, but it still stands very proudly in the middle of the forest with no other rock nearby, seemingly just placed there by some roving giant eons ago. After Juilliard somehow stumbled across this rock in the woods, I have no idea how, use your imagination, I guess, he went back with a friend, Paul, to climb the rock. They did so in the style of the time. No chalk, no crash pads, just boots, not shoes. They set up plenty of climbs on it, all aside for one face neither could seem to pull on and mantle. After a summer of nonstop trying to hold on to the ledge, Alan finally sent it. This became the first V8 in the state. Shortly thereafter, Service Boulder became polluted by roving Anchorage gangs. Alan and Paul have not been back there since, but their legacy lives on in the boulder that many Anchorageans, restless for summer, frequent when the snow begins to melt, in town but not in the mountains. As a funny aside about how little climbers care to climb here, I was introduced to this rock not by climber, but some random friend who called it the rock, after tromping through 5 feet of snow to go climb a different large rock that weekend. After this, to the best of my knowledge, there was a lull in development. Bouldering just did not really catch on. All that people were interested in were the massive mountains and the alpine, and I mean, rightly so, it is the state for it. But as a counter-argument, to paraphrase the great mountaineer and inventor of bouldering, Arthur Eckenstein, bouldering is where you train for the hard moves in the alpine. So, eventually, bouldering would develop more in the state, because the alpine scene would develop more. Finally, in the mid-90s, a climber named Chris Terry realized that there were boulders along the Seward Highway. He realized that these were close enough to town, accessible, a great way to train for hard moves in the alpine, a la Oscar Eckenstein, and a great way to get his climbing fix in. So in the mid-90s, he began to develop these. cleaning and scrubbing, forging trails through the Alaskan bush, climbing and documenting. Through purse capacity and hard work, he set up many boulders along the highway in a few short Alaskan summers, before something even larger was discovered. In 1996, Chris Terry and Dan Krieger discovered something even better: the Chickaloon boulders. While it was too late in the season to pull onto the diminutive mudstone rocks, they vowed to go out the next summer, assuming it wasn't too wet, because pulling onto mudstone when it's wet would damage it terribly. In 97, the Chickaloon development began. Though bouldering had echoed throughout the years of Alaska prior, this was the first time that there were large boulders across an area, rather than a scattering of boulders here and a smattering there. I would, in fact, argue that this was the first real bouldering area set up in south central Alaska, real because of density, quality, and difficulty of problems, unlike somewhere like Service Boulder. Despite how much they were enjoying Chickaloon, they looked out further. Dan Krieger discovered an area called Hatcher's Pass, and it was this wild area that would truly rocket bouldering into the forefront of the Alaskan climbing scene. Terry and Krieger finished off Chickaloon for the most part that summer and endeavored to the place that seemed to be the best bouldering in Alaska, Hatcher's Pass. There, through the summers of 98 and 99, routes upon routes became established. It was like the Klondike Gold Rush, but for bouldering, more boulders than one could believe. A heaven for any climber, especially in the sparse land of rocky spires and barren tundra. A damper is put on their enthusiasm the next summer, because it rained all summer, as kind of happens occasionally in Alaska. There's so much moisture that no new route became established for the whole summer of 2000. However, Krieger and Terry had something else in mind. Now, I'll preface this section with some geography, as I believe it is necessary to grasp the development of Ptarmigan Bowl and the whole valley itself. I could not find good information on when this area in Alaska was discovered. I'm assuming it's during the summer of 2000 with all the rain, but I do not know for sure. In 2001, after that summer, Krieger and Terry began the development of this area in the Alaskan mountains. It is quite close to Anchorage proper in Chugach State Park. I will give you a basic sketch of the geography of the area, as it becomes important later, as I stated prior. The trail they started on is called Powerline Pass, and it is an old road turned hiking, biking trail, cross-country skiing trail, and snowmobiling trail. It connects the hillside area of Anchorage to the Seward Highway through the mountains. It also brings electricity from Chugach to Girdwood, so power lines are dotted across the valleys up and over the pass along Turnagain Arm. For now, we will focus on the south side of the valley. The valley is divided in the middle by a river. The northern side will become more important later. On the south side, the valley is flanked by 8 peaks, leading up to and later forming Powerline Pass. These peaks from west to east are Flat Top, Peaks 1, 2, and 3, Flake Top, Ptarmigan Peak, Hope Mountain, which is my favorite for reasons I'll explain later, and Southeast Powerline Peak. And before you ask, no, there is no other Powerline Peak in this area. I've not been able to ascertain why it is called this. Ptarmigan Peak is a massive craggy rock that juts out of the tundra, as is typical of the Chugach. This mountain has a history of being one of the most epic front range peaks in Anchorage and has a unique history of avalanche deaths and accidents. I cannot really say how Krieger and Terry discovered the bowl below this peak, if someone informed them of it, if one found it on a hike bike, or they found it while they were scouting for boulders. All I can say is that development began in earnest in the summer of '01 and extended in the summer of '02. While not nearly as many climbs as Hatcher's, the problems provided were of excellent quality, density, and difficulty, and remained quite accessible because of how close to Anchorage they were. It is here that I myself have a few questions. Later, I discovered and developed boulders that were unclimbed further up towards Powerline Pass at the base of Hope Mountain. Additionally, I have been informed that future player David Funataki found climbs even further up at the base of Avalanche Peak. I'm not certain how these boulders were missed. Were Krieger and Terry satisfied with just the Ptarmigan Bowl? This seems somewhat uncharacteristic to me based off their previous exploits. Did they just like Hatchers that much more? It's quite possible, but it's hard to imagine they didn't walk a mile further and discover hundreds of boulders. My personal guess, again, I have no idea how accurate this is, it is idle speculation, is that the large Anchorage earthquake of, I believe, 2017 created these. It is idle speculation, I stress again, but that is the best explanation I can think of for why they did not venture further towards the pass. Now, off that tangent, Hatcher's Pass expanded more and more climbers started to boulder. I do not have too much information on some of these, but I have read and heard some anecdotes throughout the years. Several climbers contributed massively to explosion of Hatcher's Pass in '02 through '08. These are kind of the original generation, if you will. They were the original purveyors of Alaskan climbing, and to my knowledge, all but one are inactive today. Krieger and Terry have already discussed at length. Hans Sachs was known for climbing in a suit and listening only to Beethoven. He also lived in a treehouse, I think I read somewhere. Jeff Gleason was known for absurdly long arms, breaking bait on numerous people's routes, which always shatters dreams. And then Todd Hegelson, the only one I know of who is still active today. The man basically responsible for bringing Alaskan climbing to the new generations, and in many ways, the king of Alaskan bouldering. These men combined developed tons of climbs throughout Hatcher's Pass, discovering new problems at Long Lake and found boulders at the old sport climbing crag of Wiener Lake. Just to clarify, Long Lake and Wiener Lake are separate from Hatcher's Pass. With the assistance of Tom Ellis, they brought climbing as far north as Fairbanks. In the '09 through '11 timeframe, Ellis, Hegelson, Krieger, Terry, Clayson, and Sachs, along with two Colorado hardmen, whose names I could not find, I don't know why, brought climbing into what was the most popular areas in Hatcher's Pass, Archangel Valley and Independence. As an interesting side note, in support of my earthquake theory, some of the Archangel Valley climbs were created during a 2012 earthquake. But now, it was time for a change. In 2011, David Funataki and Chris Barnett and Eddie Fay realized that there was quite possibly a new area much nearer to Anchorage. So, they ventured out and discovered an area in the glacial erratics at the base of a sport wall near Girdwood. This area would go on to be called Byron Glacier. This new area yielded some impressive and hard boulders and was closer to Anchorage than Hatcher's Pass by quite a bit. While some excellent problems went up here over the years, as well as the first 514 in the state on a sport route sent by Todd Hegelson, it has been somewhat infrequently trafficked due to the awful landings and weird grading. It is a strange test piece for Alaskan climbing, consisting of V7s easier than V4s and V8s harder than V10, as well as some super height dependent routes, so much so that one route is labeled as V9 if you're short and V7 if you're tall. While I love this area, my first V7 and V8 outdoors, it is a bit peculiar and not frequented nearly as much as some of the other areas. This next part is pretty controversial in the Alaskan climbing community. This guy, I will not mention his last name or show his picture here because he'd probably die of embarrassment if he found out that he was on the internet. But he is my favorite climbing coach of all time and really the guy who got me into outdoor climbing. But he made a lot of enemies and burned a lot of bridges in the outdoor climbing community in Alaska. So, without further ado, I introduce to you Chris. In 2017, a short-statured, very foul-mouthed, ripped wine connoisseur burst onto the Alaskan climbing scene. He was an amazing climber, and in my opinion at least, a wonderful man. No social media, no arrogance at all, just a wonderful personality, although a bit dark, and a wonderful climber. His name is Chris. I will not share his last name, as I said already, because he'd die of embarrassment if he found out how much he contributed to Alaskan climbing and how much respect I have for him. He worked at the nicest restaurant in Anchorage as a wine taster, which is very strange for a dirtbag climber. He quickly sent some of the hardest routes in the state, like really easily, on sighting them and destroying long-standing projects and mystifying everyone. He sent double-digit grades people had taken decades to do in 2 tries after breaking holds on accident as well. He was a really phenomenal man. His stay in Alaska was short-lived, though, after he and his girlfriend built out a van to live in. He left Alaska never to be seen again, but the taste he had left in the Alaskan community's mouth will never be washed away, for better or for worse, I guess. He left a love in me for developing outdoor climbing. He nearly did the first V14 in Alaska, but broke the important hold on his Sindingo. He was also a very renowned sandbagger. He is now elsewhere in the United States, and he sent a climb that locals thought would be V15, and I believe he rated it V10. And that gives you a sense just for who he was as a man. Just a wonderful, wonderful guy. In the pandemic summer, the local climbing gym was obviously closed. I couldn't train even though I wanted to. I'm not fully certain what a lot of climbers are doing this summer, but it seems to me a lot more climbing should have been done across the state. I know David Funataki, the man responsible for Byron bouldering, set up a bunch of new routes in Ptarmigan Bowl. I know a lot of sport went up at Hatchers, but the bouldering remained strangely silent. Because there was very little to climb, me and my friends, Malachi and Daniel, began blitzkrieging the boulders across the creek on the northern side of Powerline Pass. We set up around 30 routes, including a high ball. But on July 4th, my younger brother and I discovered something amazing: Hope Bowl, only a mile beyond Ptarmigan, right at the base of Hope Mountain. We began developing all the boulders therein. Currently, I believe there are around 150 problems in the bowl, ranging from V0 to V11. Some classics include the higher power of bun huggers, somewhere between V2 and V7. No one is really sure. No, like seriously, there is no consensus on it. The V2, which is a V5, Pyramid, V11, Stitches, V11, both those are Hendrix routes. I Am Machine, V7 to V10, again, no one's really sure. I think I and one other person have done it. Journey to Olympus, one of the most unique V7s ever, and my personal favorite, Man in the Arena, V8. After Hope Bowl and Creekside, we turned our eyes up to the ball field, which is on the northern side, right at the start of Powerline Pass Trail. Me, with the assistance of my brother Henrik, Spencer Scaling, Jason Cooper, Vance, and Victor, we developed these early season boulders in random tundra on top of a mountain. Though this area remains a far hike, it is a wonderful place for early season bouldering, and inspired more areas through the inspirations of Jason and Spencer. The future of Alaska bouldering looks very bright. Just 2 months ago, Spencer found a new climbing area at the northern side of Powerline Pass below a mountain called the Wedge. Vance Stanfield, who also has his own YouTube channel, shout out to him, and my brother Henrik, who has a photography Instagram called Permafrost Pictures, continue to send some of the hardest projects in the state. Climbing in some ways is the search for immortality. As all men throughout Alaskan bouldering history struggle to put up new routes, we etch our names into the annals of it. A footnote in the bouldering history, the ultimate legacy. I do not know all of the stories of Alaskan bouldering, unfortunately, but I have made this broad overview as best I could. I hope that this inspires the next generation as the previous generation inspired me, and the previous generation inspired them. I do not know if I will ever have the opportunity to develop boulders in Alaska again, but I do know the development will continue, and I hope mine and others' impacts on the community will never be forgotten. Thank you for watching.